Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give another moment just to let everybody in the room, and then we're going to kick off shortly.
Attention visitors, please wear your mask in patient rooms, care areas, and waiting rooms.
Okay, welcome everybody. I just want to say thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. We are very excited to have everyone with us today for our latest NIA webinar that we're hosting today. And so my name is Dr. Samir Sinha. I am the Director of Geriatrics at Sinai Health and the University Health Network, but I'm also the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Institute on Aging. You see that from our introductory slide here that we just want to note that all member microphones are muted, that if you do have any questions for our speakers today, please use the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. That's where you can ask any questions for myself and our guests today to answer. And if you have any technical questions or anything else or technical issues, you can use the chat box for that. So again, thank you for joining us, and it's great to see a great turnout today. And we've had over 360 people register for today's talk, so we're excited. We'll go to the next slide. So I just wanted to start today with a land acknowledgement. So Toronto Metropolitan University, where the National Institute on Aging is based, is housed in Toronto, which is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Go to the next slide. So I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today. As you know, it's called The Influence of Later Life Financial Security on Aging Well, and really about supporting healthy outcomes in retirement. And this is something that I've been really excited to work on over the past year. Myself and one of our lead researchers, Madison Bridges, Dr. Madison Bridges, she and I both collaborated with others across the country to really delve into this issue and to really look at it clearly, because one of the key things is, I think as a physician, about the importance of healthy aging and aging well is the importance of understanding the benefit or the influence really of financial security as it comes to influence that as well. So we really want to delve in deep and look at these issues across the life course to understand how financial security, during our working years can influence our later life health outcomes, but also how financial security really influences aging well for older Canadians. And so that was what the focus of this research and this white paper that we produced were about. And that's the focus of today's work. Through the NIA, we do a lot of work that's focused on healthy aging, looking at issues of social well-being, but also looking at the importance of financial security. And what we often do is partner with other organizations that are like-minded, that are interested in looking at these issues with us. And that's why we were very privileged to have the support of OMERS to do this work, so that we could actually look in to this issue as well. So I just want to give you an overview of today's event and just what you're going to expect. What we're going to do is we're going to have a brief presentation just so that some of you who've not actually had a chance to read our report, you're going to get the overview of what were the issues we were looking at, so we can frame the issue, can frame this webinar together. So I'll introduce that. Then I'm going to introduce our special guest, Celine Chiovitti, who is joining us from OMERS today. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A back and forth just to talk a little bit more about some of the issues that we found interesting from this work as well. And then it's going to be over to you. We want you as our participants to ask us questions that you'd like us to provide our insights and answers around. So that's how we're going to fill up this hour, and we're really looking forward to an exciting hour ahead. So again, just if you have any questions for either Celine or myself, we're going to ask you to put those in the Q&A section, which is the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical issues or concerns throughout the webinar, we have a great team that is supporting this webinar, and they are at the ready, Allison and Joanne, to help provide some support through the chat as well. Okay, so let's go to our next slides. So I want to give a little bit of context around the report that we created. Really, what we want to focus on is looking, first of all, at our aging population, because right now, close to 1 in 5 Canadians is an older Canadian. So Canadian who's 65 and older, as I like to say, 65 and better. And when we think about this population, sometimes we get the notion in our head that when we become older, we are more likely to move into a long-term care home or settings. But we know that well over 90% of our older population are out there living in their own homes and communities. And when we actually look at this population, 96% of Canadians 65 and older have told us that they will do everything they can to avoid moving into a long-term care home. So again, once we get older, yes, there are some older people who end up moving and living into a long-term care home, but the vast majority of older Canadians are living independently in the community and are very keen to continue doing so for as long as possible. We'll go to the next slide. We know that older adults, though, with fewer financial resources may have trouble paying for recreational activities and other out-of-pocket costs that can allow them to age in the right place. So you can imagine, especially in today's economy, where we've seen rising inflation, we see increasing costs of rentals, for example, and costs of food and costs of living in general. It is really causing a lot of older people to struggle, especially if they might be on a fixed income, for example, or they might just not have enough in the way of savings and other economic resources to draw upon. So we know that everyone is struggling in our economy, but we know that for older adults who have fewer financial resources and may not have the opportunity, for example, to return to the workplace, for example, or take on more work or better paying work, this can really start limiting a number of different things, not only recreational, but other just basic living expenses as well. And that can really start impeding someone's ability to age, as we like to say, in the right place for them. We'll go to the next slide. We know when we start thinking about the things that impact health and well-being in later life, what we want to do in our report was really look at the impact of income specifically on health and well-being in later life. That was really the focus of the report. And really what we found, and I don't think people will find this overly surprising, that if you are in a lower income situation, you are going to have worse physical and mental health outcomes. You know, why worse mental health outcomes? Probably because, you know, if you are less financially secure, and it's hard for you to be able to live the life you want to live and to, you know, be an active member of your community, that can certainly create more issues of social isolation, loneliness, anxiety, and depression. And so we see that lower income can certainly drive mental health outcomes, poor mental health outcomes as well. And you can also imagine that if you also have a lower ability, for example, to afford the food and the other services that you need, or to pay for additional access to rehabilitation or other services, you will likely suffer worse physical outcomes. And this can not just in terms of your physical mobility, for example, but also to your general health and well-being, especially if you're living with chronic health conditions that require you to maybe buy certain types of food or try and pursue certain types of activities, for example, that would help you stay healthier and well. when you take the flip side of this, when we look at people who have higher income, we obviously see that they'll have better health system access that can actually help them better support their physical and mental health and well-being. We also know that those with higher income are more likely to die at home for those receiving end-of-life care, because they may be more likely to afford additional services that can allow them to die at home. We also know that those who are of higher income are less likely to end up living in a long-term care home, perhaps because they can afford extra supports and services as well that can allow them to be able to live in their own homes for as long as possible. We'll go to the next slide. We know that also having an unstable income during one's working years, so again, before one becomes an older Canadian, so in your earlier younger years, for example, has been linked with an increased risk of physical and mental health issues later in life. So we know that it's not just something that's dealing with a higher or lower income later in life, but throughout our working years, for example, if your income is unstable, if you're going paycheck to paycheck, for example, you can imagine how this can increase that risk of physical health issues, but also mental health issues later in life, especially if some of those issues might develop earlier, or the precursors to those issues develop earlier during our lifespan as well. Go to the next slide. And we also know that amongst Canadian men born in 1923 to 1955, those who are in the top 5% of income distribution end up living 8 years longer compared to men in the bottom 5% of the income distribution. So we obviously see this around the world, where if you look at data from the UK, the United States, for example, or Canada, we certainly are showing that while we say the average Canadian lives 82 years of age, we certainly are seeing a significant spread based on income, for example, but also when we look at other what we call social determinants of health as well. So there is a significant gap between lifespan that really is influenced by people's incomes. And this is where we need to really understand how all of this kind of fits together, especially driven by income issues as well. Go to the next slide. So what is the impact of income on health and well-being in later life? We know that regardless of income, worrying about future financial outlook is associated with worse mental health. So again, regardless of whether you're actually wealthy or not wealthy, for example, if you are constantly worrying about your future financial outlook, we know that can affect your worse mental health. And that was an interesting finding, the idea that the idea of financial insecurity is more of a feeling, for example, even that you might actually bear regardless of your wealth status. And therefore, but we know that those people, for example, who are more likely to be lower income or have an unstable income are more likely to feel financially insecure. That can actually be associated with worsened mental health. We also know that being unable to pay your bills and having debt is also associated with worse mental health as well. So again, we look at not just kind of physical health issues, but significant mental health issues that occur as well. We'll go to the next slide. So we really came up, understanding all of these things together, we really put this together in terms of what are recommendations to financially support aging Canadians, and really thinking of this across a life course approach, because while we certainly looked at these issues in later life, for example, we also, as I was sharing with you, just a few data points related to what we know about working age Canadians and how some of these issues early on in life can certainly influence later life health and well-being as well. So we came up with some recommendations, which we'll show you now, which really focus on the next pieces. I'll just advance the slide here. So we came up with 6 policy recommendations. The first one was really about, we need to really improve our financial literacy and planning. So making sure that Canadians of all ages understand and appreciate what are those financial options, how the retirement income system works in Canada, and how those who are thinking about their later life financial security know that it's not only about Canada pension plan, but also potentially looking for workplace pension plans, for example, and also understanding the expectation that Canadians are also saving in their own way, and how our retirement income system is really built along these three ways. And there are strategies and things we can do from an early period to better support our later life financial security. We really looked at how the majority of Canadians, working Canadians now, do not have access to a workplace pension plan, but workplace pension plans become a convenient way for Canadians to save and support their later life's financial security. And again, workplace pension plans are not the same thing. These are separate from, say, things like the Canada pension plan as well. So again, making sure that we give more people access to workplace pension plans. But when you also look at workplace pension plans, we also talked about the different types of workplace pension plans. There are workplace pension plans called defined contribution plans, where you save up money and then you get a lump sum when you retire that you then have to figure out how you manage. And then there's a second type of plan called the defined benefit plan, where you make contributions, but then you are guaranteed when you retire a guaranteed income for life, monthly payments that are secure, and you will not outlive at all. So again, when we start thinking about this recommendation 3, we talk about the importance of income stability and security by facilitating workplace pension plans that provide that post-retirement income security. And this is where we find that defined benefit plans tend to really offer that later life income stability and security, which is really important for the health and well-being, as we've discussed, for older Canadians. We also talk about the options that might be available for Canadians who happen to own a home to improve their options to leverage their home equity as well, to allow them to better enable aging in the right place. We also talk about the importance of protecting Canadians from out-of-pocket long-term care costs, because most Canadians might think about saving for their retirement or for later life based on what they think they might need to live. But often it's out-of-pocket long-term care expenses that might be not anticipated that can certainly really put people's financial security at risk in later life and may drive them earlier into a long-term care home. And then finally, we have to recognize that not all Canadians, have had the benefit of being able to buy a house or have significant savings. So how do we make sure that we support lower income Canadians by evaluating, considering additional measures? All of this, again, is captured in our policy paper that we will share at the end of this webinar and a post-webinar email. But I just want to share with you again the focus on what we were talking about in our report, and what we came up with our recommendations. So we'll move on now, and what I wanted to do is now introduce with our next slide. I wanted to introduce so we'll thank you. I want to now introduce our special guest today, Celine Chiovitti. She's our Executive Vice President and Head of Pensions for OMERS. I'm just going to read out your bio, Celine, if that's okay. Celine is responsible for leading a team of 400 employees in the delivery of exceptional services, innovative tools, and prudential pension administration for over 500,000 members. Under her leadership, the team is committed to delivering a world-class pension platform in a complex stakeholder environment with more than 1,000 employers and 30 unions and associations. Prior to joining OMERS in 2013, she spent her career in public service, including as a division head at the City of Toronto, where she was responsible for pension, payroll, and benefits delivery for over 35,000 unionized and non-unionized employees. Her career has been focused on service, making a positive impact in the lives of Ontarians, and the fundamental belief in the value of well-run pension systems and the positive impact they can have on society. So I want to thank you, Celine, for being here, and I'm going to turn off my screen so that you can say a few remarks, and then we'll get into a Q&A.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sina. I wanted to thank you really for being part of this conversation and for allowing me to be part of this conversation. It's something that's really, really near and dear to my heart. And pensions is something I am extremely passionate about. And so you talked a little bit about my background and my career. I would say, when I think about pensions on a professional level, it's felt by me each and every day in my interactions with our members. And so I have the great fortune of dealing with our members on a daily basis. And I know those that are contributing to the plan and are planning for their retirement, I know how meaningful it is for them, but then also those who are retired and have access to this secure and stable income. I really feel the difference there. On a more personal level, I did spend my career in the public service. And so at a very young age, I think literally right out of school, I started my first job in the municipal public sector. And I was enrolled in the OMERS pension plan at that time. And I have to say, I didn't know anything about pensions. I was more concerned about paying off some student debt and trying to figure out how to get out of my parents' house. And so it seemed like something that was very, very far away. But I look at myself now and I can attest to the fact that, I believe that my, retirement in the foreseeable future is something that's attainable to me. I know that my pension is one of my greatest assets. And so it's something that I do try and talk to everybody about, regardless of their age. I also come from, immigrant parents who came to Canada in the 1970s and worked really, really hard to give us a better life. And they did a phenomenal job. Neither of them have an employer sponsored pension plan. And so, they do live and rely on their own savings and rely on a government sponsored pension plans. And so I live and breathe it, and I just know the importance of it. And so it's research like this conducted through the NIA that really helps us have a conversation at all levels around this really important topic. And so again, just thank you for including me in the conversation, and I'm happy for us to talk.
Thanks so much, Celine. And again, welcome to today's webinar. So it's exciting because I think people are really clearly interested in this topic, as are both of us. And so I thought maybe we could just ask each other a few questions, because now that we've reviewed, for example, some of the findings from our recent report, I want to begin with, why is this research? And you spoke about your career and what you've done, and why the work that you do is very meaningful for you. But why was this research particularly of interest for OMERS to support and to really want to untangle?
So it's a great question. I mean, OMERS is one of the largest defined benefit pension plans. You talked a little bit about the difference between DB plans and DC plans. We're one of the largest jointly sponsored defined benefit pension plans. We really do believe we have an obligation to have a conversation about access to these types of plans. At OMERS, our entire purpose really is to deliver secure and stable income to our members. Our members are public sector employees, and so they really have spent their careers serving the public. And we feel a big responsibility to ensuring that when they do leave the workforce, that they're taken care of, they have peace of mind. And so the connection of what you were able to really demonstrate through the research was, very, very important to us and our members. We conducted research back in 2020 with CanCEA that demonstrated the economic and social value of these types of plans. And so we know the impact it has to society and to local communities that go beyond just our members. And so we know that these types of pension plans actually create jobs. It contributes to the GDP. It contributes to local communities. We also found through that research that our members were more, happier in life, if you will. They had more well-being. They were able to sort of go back out into the community and be more charitable. They weren't as worried about having to save for their health care and others. And so the research conducted through the National Institute on Aging really reinforced this sort of direct connection between having adequate, secure, stable income on aging well. And so we think it's our responsibility to be part of this conversation. We think it's a conversation that should be had at multiple levels within, industry and policy and with other pension plans. And we really think it's important that employees themselves start to think about their pensions no matter where they are in their life. I talked about, starting my career very early. I was not interested in pensions at all. But now as I'm starting to get closer to that time, I can see sort of how tangible it is and how important it is. And so we really want to be part of that conversation, and we want people to be asking the right questions. So on that note,
okay.
My question to you, obviously you talked about Canada is aging as a whole. I think the entire world population is really getting older. We're definitely seeing it within our own member community. What comes to mind for you about the resources that are available, and what can society do as a whole to better prepare to care for this aging population in Ontario?
Yeah, though it's not just Ontario, as you said, it's Canada, it's the whole world. So here's an interesting stat. Right now, 19% of Ontarians and 19% of Canadians are older people, if you will. I like to say they're 65 and older, or 65 and better. And next year we're going to transition to becoming what the UN calls a super age society. At the beginning of this decade, there were only 3 countries in the world that were what we call super age society, and that means 20% or more of your population is 65 and older. And Canada is now going to join the ranks of only about a dozen or so countries that are now in this category. And we know that we're not done. We're by the end of this decade, 1 in 4 Canadians is actually going to be an older Canadian. So we have a rapidly aging population, and then we also have the challenges that come with aging well and wanting to age in place. We've heard loud and clear that Canadians want to stay healthy and independent in their own homes as long as possible. People will need to have a variety of options. For some people to want to what we call age in the right place, they may need access to additional supports and services so they can stay independent in their community. That might be access to transportation services, for example. That might be access to other services to support them to stay social and engaged, for example, or to receive care in their own homes. We also have other people who say, you know what, I'd like to move into a retirement home, for example. I'd like to be with others and have my meals prepared for me and also have recreational activities. We talk about whatever the right place is for people, but allowing people to have options. But the challenge that we're seeing increasingly is this issue of financial security and how it really is money that determines whether or not you can have some options to either choose to age in your own homes or choose a congregate living environment that you're actually interested in. And one thing that I often say is that when I make a diagnosis of dementia, in my mind, I quickly think about my patient and their family in front of me, and I say, well, do you have a supportive family? And do you have money? Because those are the 2 important things that are going to determine how well you can be in control of your future. So you said something, Celine, about the importance of stability and security, that peace of mind that a lot of, as you said, OMERS members or those who have, for example, defined benefit pension have, because at least they know that regardless of how long I live, it's not like I have a sum of money and will I run out? I have a guaranteed income for life, and the peace of mind that gives so many of my patients and families when they're in that situation can be helpful. But our goal again is thinking about how do we allow people to have more financial resources or better financial security so they can be in control of those options. So when we think about aging and aging in the right place, it's making sure that we have the right types of services and supports available in adequate amounts, but also that they're affordable and they're attainable for every older Canadian. So I want to ask you on that basis. So I remember reading somewhere that OMERS oldest member, so the oldest member of your organization's pension program is 108 years old. Maybe they're now 109. But how does an aging member community and pensioners who are living longer than ever before, how does that affect the pension plan? Because again, I don't know if when OMERS started its pension plan, you expected that you'd have members living to 108. I think that's amazing. But I also wonder if partly your membership might be aging potentially more successfully because there's more income security. But tell me about this, because you must have not only a growing membership, but also a growing and aging membership too.
Yeah. It's so interesting to sort of see the dynamic shift. And so we've been around since the 1960s. To your point, our oldest member today is 108 years old. He's actually been collecting a pension for over 40 years, which is phenomenal. We have, if I look at the number of members we have over 100 years old, we have close to 300 members that are over 100 years old. And so you're right, back in the 1960s, that wouldn't have been sort of the projection of longevity. So we've definitely seen sort of that shift there, and we've got sort of a big onslaught of baby boomers as part of the plan who will, they've been contributing to their pension over their working career. They're now about, approaching that retirement age where they can start to collect a pension, and so it's great to see that they're definitely living longer. On the other end of that, though, our youngest member is 14 years old,
Okay.
and so 14 to 108, like there's just such a dynamic there. With everything, with what type of pension do they want, with what type of pension can they afford, how do you provide the right services and products to all of them. So we're definitely a multi-generational membership, and I think when we think about, when we then look forward to 2030, we know that the majority of active members at that point will be millennials and Generation Z. And so, one of the things that you've called out in the report as far as the recommendations is improved planning and literacy. And so that's something we're really paying a lot of attention to. It's trying to engage those younger members at an earlier point in time. And so to your point, so that they can ask the right questions and make the right decisions. And, again, we do believe that having access to this type of pension plan is one of the reasons they stay with their employers. And so that's sort of a conversation that needs to keep happening. But I going back to the fact that we have an aging demographic as a whole, you provided some stats. I think we have more seniors today who are over the age of 65 than we have, children under the age of 14.
Mhm.
And so outside of the OMERS plan, just as a society as a whole, it's something that we need to be paying attention to. We are all in this together. And so, you've been able to highlight many, many reasons why having access to this type of pension is actually, that's the part of the model of the Canadian pension system, assumes that you would have access to an employer-sponsored pension plan. So when more than 60% of our Canadians don't have access to that, it's a problem, and we need to be having that conversation to see what can we do a little bit differently to make sure that more people are in the same place.
Absolutely.
So can we're going back to sort of that financial literacy piece. My question to you would be, can you describe the ways that health can impact financial stability for older Canadians?
Yeah, I mean, you can think about, how does health impact that financial stability? You can imagine that even at a younger age, for example, if we're not ensuring that people in our labor force, in our workforce, or people of working age can stay healthy and well, it's then hard for people to actually be able to participate, in the workforce. So the key is making sure that this is why it's been so important to think about workplace protections and things that we can do so people don't get injured on the job. It's also making sure that people can stay healthy and well so that they can actually have a long and successful career doing the work that they want to do as well. And it's also thinking about the fact that 1 in 3 working Canadians is also an unpaid caregiver as well. So balancing unpaid caregiving duties with work as well. And so it's all those sorts of things that can affect kind of health and well-being, because you can imagine for that latter group, for example, if you are an unpaid caregiver, you might actually reduce your hours, you might forgo your work, and then that can financially penalize you because, for example, either you're just not collecting income, and you're also potentially not contributing to a workplace pension or developing your savings further, and that can actually penalize you later in life. You also think about folks, for example, who are not supported in the workplace to stay healthy and well, and how that can actually limit career opportunities. We're certainly doing some work, for example, with Veterans Affairs Canada right now, which is looking at the modern day veteran and how there are higher rates of physical disability and also rates of things like PTSD, that all of those sorts of things can actually mean that one has to reduce your time in the workplace. So you can imagine how this is what's happening, from a health standpoint during your working age. And then imagine now you've retired, and that health, if that health has not been supported and maintained, it might actually be a precursor to more challenges early on in your later years, for example, which could shorten your life expectancy as well. So this is how kind of the health aspects can influence your financial security, because again, if you don't have good financial security, then you can imagine it can affect your health and well-being. Because back to that whole issue about if you don't actually have the finances that can allow you to, buy the food that you want to buy, live where you want to live, pay for heating, pay for cooling, especially in a hot summer like that one we're having right now, you can imagine how all that compounds. So one thing we really wanted to look at in this report was just how interconnected the issues of health and well-being and financial security are, and how it's not just a later life issue. It really is something that early on, those sorts of things can really impact. And it's interesting, Celine, you mentioned how, when OMERS was started in the 1960s, well, life expectancy wasn't beyond our 60s at that time. And now you just talked about 300 members being over 100 and your oldest member being 108. So I really do believe that that while health affects financial security, I honestly do believe that when people are more financially secure in their life, and more importantly in later life too, that's probably promoting longevity and health and well-being as well. So it really is highly interrelated, and I want listeners to appreciate that it really is so highly interconnected. You have to think about both issues. You can't think of them in isolation as well.
Mhm.
But building
The
on
other
that, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say what
Yeah.
struck me as you're talking is I think about, people like me who, again, older parents who are sort of in that place and really trying to, stretch out their savings while they are retired, and, younger children that you're supporting. And so we're sort of the sandwich generation that's sort of
Yeah.
taking care of everybody. And then the impact, even just from a mental health perspective there on those individuals will be an interesting phenomena to see how we navigate through all of that.
No, very much so, right? So one thing, like one term that I've heard you use before, and we talk about in the report too, is this idea of social infrastructure. And I know that you use this term to capture the impact that pensions can have. But can you explain this a little bit more? I think you were referring to some of the previous work that had been done, kind of showing the impact that pensions can have. But
Yeah.
what do you mean by this term social infrastructure?
Yeah, and I'm really trying to fine tune what I mean by social infrastructure. Like you've spoken a little bit about it, which is sort of the support that we need to provide. I fundamentally believe that to be a great country like Canada, you need support. You need to be able to sort of provide services and policies and places to citizens in order to ensure that it remains vibrant, productive, and caring society. Like that's who we are as Canada. And so when I think of social infrastructure, I actually think of it as infrastructure. To me, it's sort of the foundational elements of the things that we do in our society to create that vibrancy. And so the research we did with CanCEA called out, some of the ways that we do that. The pension plans play a role in it. We're certainly not the only ones, but we do play a role in that. And so, the concept that when you have money going back into small communities, and so I as part of the investments that we make in Ontario, as well as we pay pensioners, and those pensioners actually go back to their communities that are able to put money into that community, and they're also able to then care more for society, be more charitable, and participate more in that. And so I think that's what I mean by social infrastructure. It really is all of those things that we do as a society to care for each other and to really ensure that the society continues to do that going forward. And we've seen it, like I think outside of Canada, I mean, you see this conversation happening. You see it in Paris when they talk about, making changes to the retirement age. You see it in Colombia. This is not a conversation that's specific to Canada, but I think what you're seeing is you're seeing society really pay more attention and saying that we care about our older adults. And there is a need for us to come together and find a way that works where everybody is taken care of. We're actually quite fortunate, I think, in Canada with our pension model, in that we do have the Canada Pension Plan and the old age security. And so I think we have those fundamental elements. However, part of, again, going back, that system was created a long time ago, and part of it does assume access to an employer-sponsored pension plan. When you don't have that, then, maybe we don't have elderlies living in total poverty, but not much better. And so we know that we need to do better. And to me, that is, that is part of social infrastructure. It's the element of pensions and caring for our elders across Canada.
No, I love it.
So you talked a little bit about this, but I want to just go back to preparing financially. And some of the findings in the report were about unexpected shocks for people when they are retired, and that they don't necessarily sort of take that into consideration. So can you speak just a little bit more on why do aging people need to prepare financially, and how do they need to think about potential financial shocks when they are retired?
Yeah, and I think it's a nice way to tie in everything together here, because when we talk about financial literacy and understanding, honestly, until I started doing this research, I didn't realize that we had, the Canadian government created this retirement income system, generations ago, assuming, for example, that I would, not only have my Canada pension plan, we all love that. And we're like, I'm paying CPP, right? That's my pension. That's it. Well, actually, as you said, it's assuming also that you're getting a workplace pension, which 60% of Canadians are not now, for example. And then also that I'm also actively saving. So there's two things that I need to, there's three things that I need to be involved in. And unfortunately, most Canadians are only able to really participate in one. There may not be in a position where they're actually either, kind of actively saving, for, kind of retirement, for example, because maybe assuming that, well, that's what the Canada pension plan is for. I don't need to, do those savings, and not understand that how there's also this assumption that if you don't have access to a workplace pension plan, that's why you need to be saving more, for example, or, why it's valuable to think about getting those opportunities. Because I think a lot of people are in for a rude awakening when they find out that your Canada pension plan is only designed to replace about, a third of your income, your pre-retirement income as well. So I think this is where people start realizing that while they're thinking about saving for retirement, and they say, okay, well, I have my CPP, I've got these other elements, some savings and that. Well, this should kind of allow me just to, continue living the way I'm living. Except you mentioned the financial shocks that can occur, right? So this is the challenge where a lot of people don't think about other things that can happen as we age, such as I might need long-term care services. Long-term care services could be home care. It could be other supports to help you stay independent in your community. It may be that if you move into a long-term care home or need a retirement home, that there are often co-payments in place. And I think the challenge we also have for Canadians is when we developed Medicare, back in the 60s, at the same time we developed a retirement income system, there was a catch there too. Medicare includes physician services and hospital services. It was never designed and guaranteed to cover our long-term care services. So that becomes another rude awakening for people when they retire. One, they realize, wait a minute, CPP doesn't cover all of my retirement income needs. And number two, oh, wait, long-term care services aren't covered. I think of them as healthcare and the healthcare system delivers them, but I didn't save up for that. And I think those are the financial shocks that can really sink people, because when I, again, I make that diagnosis of dementia, and I have to start working with my families to say, at some point, my patient's going to need 24/7 care. sometimes people say, well, we don't have family members or friends, and we're going to have to, how are we going to afford that? And when people start realizing that if you want 24/7 private care at home, that's going to cost you $25,000 a month potentially. A lot of people don't have that kind of money. So this is where, again, how do we start getting people early in life to understand about the importance of not only having adequate later life income, but also adequate later life income that could be ready for potential financial shocks. The most significant one that often older Canadians face is those long-term care costs. And just as you mentioned, Celine, if I can speak, about you raised your family as an example. For example, you said, okay, well, I'm actually more financially secure because I have a workplace pension plan. I understand this is your job. But you talked about your parents. You said your parents worked really hard, but they don't actually maybe have all those income supports and all those things in place. And if they didn't plan out as well, as you said, as a member of the sandwich generations, often I see family members that are pitching in and helping out, but that could also affect their own financial security. So how do we think about this for everybody so that we can all go into our later life eyes wide open and ready to support that as well? So it's such a fascinating area, and I think this is why I think we're both passionate about this area. But I think a lot of our attendees are as well, and I see that we've got questions. So I'm going to, for the last 10-15 minutes here, I'm just going to go in and take a look at some of the questions that we have coming in here. For example, a lot of our audience members are asking about what resources and changes might be on the horizon to better financially support people, and how can we better advocate for greater financial supports to enable aging in the right place. I'll ask you, Celine, like we've written a report, together, if you will, that really speaks about how we need to really think about improving kind of financial supports for people. Can you speak to any, any resources or changes that might be on the horizon? I can certainly speak to some of the stuff that the NIA is advocating for and doing, but where do you feel that, where do you feel things are moving, or where do you feel the industry or government seems to be moving in these spaces?
I mean, I think that the recommendations made from the NIA report are a really great starting point. I think people taking them seriously and having the dialogue at different levels of government is really important. So where do I think? I think we're getting much better at providing like educational resources. We're talking about it more. There's more information available on the website. FSRA, I know, has leaned in and really talked about the importance of pensions and has put information on their website. There's more resources out there to try and prepare. I think we need to do better with, ensuring that the conversation happens at the employer level. I mean, some countries, not Canada, but some countries force that, and that every employer has to participate in some sort of pension plan. I think the dialogue needs to happen. I think we need to make it simpler for employers to do it and more affordable for employers to do it. But I think employees going into the workforce need to have those conversations. So many times, it's an afterthought because we're thinking of that sort of take-home pay, which is critically important, especially right now when cost of living is so high and housing affordability is really difficult. And so I get that, but I do think we need to really talk about looking at the Canadian income system, the Canadian retirement income system, and say was developed, again back in the 60s. Does that need a bit of a refresh? And how do we make sure that everybody has access to the right resources so that they can age and retire well?
Absolutely. And I think part of our advocacy, as well as you said, just looking at how do we revisit, the income system. So how do we, think about those unexpected costs that can occur, as we age, for example, those unexpected long-term care costs. And one of the things we recently published another report about was looking at international examples of public long-term care insurance programs. So, in a similar way, something beyond your pension that can allow you to maybe in a similar way, make a contribution, during your working years, so that should you need long-term care supports and services, you actually have the financial supports to pay for that. But also going back to this idea of just later life financial security, also thinking about other ways that for folks who don't have access to workplace pension plans, how do they leverage the savings or what they have to almost work, if you will, as a defined benefit workplace pension plan. So there are things that, again, we're advocating for the NIA to think about those who are in later life right now, trying to manage their finances. But back to what you said, we really need to start early, making sure that everybody knows right from the beginning, because, often when I'm recruiting people to work with me, at the hospital or at the university, and they say, and they say, like, what's an advantage of coming to work at Toronto Metropolitan University or coming to work at, say, Mount Sinai Hospital? I'm like, one of the things we offer is a defined benefit
Yeah.
pension plan.
Yeah.
And boy, you may not think that's a big deal right now, but think about it. And when people start thinking about it, they're like, this is a reason why I want to be an employee here. I think it offers a lot of employees a competitive advantage, but frankly,
Absolutely.
it really gives their employees a lifetime advantage as well.
Yeah, I think just adding a little bit to that, I think that having everyone sort of looking at their future, like having a retirement plan, the same way you would have a financial plan, no matter how old you are, you could be your 20s or 30s, but there are decisions that you can make early on in your career that will help you significantly when you retire. And so the sooner you sort of look at that and make those decisions, one, again, going back to some of the findings of the report, you talked a little bit about sort of the gendered issues that are being faced specifically with women. One of the things that we found is, people who go on pregnancy parental leave and then make decisions like not purchasing back that service, which is difficult to do again, but that impacts your pension. And so what you find, even in a DB type concept where your pension really is calculated based on your earnings and service, when you have less service at the time that you retire because you've taken those breaks and haven't purchased it back, it really significantly impacts the adequacy of the pension when you retire. And so that's a discussion that needs to happen, and something that we're focused in on here at OMERS as well.
Absolutely. So one of the attendees has asked, like, not everybody works for an employer. So what do you do if you're an independent consultant? Like, what do we do? I don't know, Celine, if you can comment on that. I can certainly give my opinion on how we need to support everybody, kind of in the workforce. But what advice would you give there?
I mean, I would say two things. I think fundamentally it's the same principle, and that you have to start thinking about saving for your retirement. There are pension plans out there that are really trying to solve for individuals sort of in more of the gig economy. And so there are some pension plans out there that are providing more options to individuals who are working on their own or in smaller organizations. So I would definitely do research around that. And then if you don't have access to those types of plans, I think saving as much as you can through RRSPs and TFSAs and other streams. But I think really looking to say, again, having a plan, how long do you think you will be working for? Factoring any sort of financial shocks throughout your working career, and then sort of doing those projections of, how long when do you plan on retiring? How long would you live for? How much do you need to put away in order to save for retirement? But I think ultimately my answer would be we need to ensure more accessibility to pension plans, whether they're DC or DB. More accessibility is the answer, and how we get there, I don't have an answer to that, but that's definitely the conversation.
Absolutely. So we have B. Vernon who asks, I think more for me, what is the government's response been to a national long-term care pension plan or insurance plan as proposed by the NIA? I will just say that that got a lot of attention, across the country, and certainly, talking about those unexpected shocks that can happen. And certainly, I think there's a lot more people talking about this idea now, which is important because that's not an issue that's going to go away. So I think there's been a positive response, and a greater interest in looking at this. And interestingly, Quebec was this close to actually introducing such a program about 10 years ago. And so this is not off the radar. And I think, if anything, the NIA's, kind of research and advocacy, just like on this issue, has helped to raise that as an opportunity. Pamela asks, where can people find information to determine how much they need to retire? That's a question that's hard to answer. And I said, Dr. Sinha, you said that CPP will only replace about a third of pre-retirement income. That's the kind of information and details Canadians need. So I'm going to give a sneak preview that my colleague, Dr. Bonnie Jean McDonald, who's our Director of Financial Security Research at the NIA, has been working on a calculator that actually can help people think about the costs of aging and work. And she's been working on this for years with a dedicated team of researchers. So I think the plan is to launch that in the next year or so as one tool. Just as Celine was saying, we really need to really support people to think about this. But Celine, can you speak to any other tools? Because Maria also says, are there any resources? That just, what are some of the other sources of information where you might recommend Canadians look to as well?
I think definitely go on FSRA's website. We have also at OMERS built out a calculator. And so I think more and more of those calculators, I haven't been on the FSRA website recently. I was there earlier in January, but to me, like being able to access that type of information where you can go and do your own projections. There's certainly financial advisors out there. I would say get a trusted source of truth because there's a lot of information out there. But I think ultimately finding out how you can put together a plan, any of the calculators you've talked about, the calculator you're looking to build sounds amazing. I could tell you at OMERS, our retirement planner tool is what we call it, is really well utilized, and it really lets you think about what is that level of income replacement I'm going to need at retirement. And so we do know that, at retirement, thinking about the expenses cost, ideally you're in a place where your expenses are generally going down. And so you don't need a 1-to-1 replacement ratio, but what would that look like depending on how you want to live? And so the more and more you can go on sort of different websites and pull out sort of those tools. I would say financial advisors, if you have, a bank that you trust, I would ask them what tools they provide. I think go on the FSRA website. If your employer, many employers do have these types of information and tools or the ability to recommend some resources there as well.
I'm going to make sure that we get a link into the chat right now for FSRA, because B. Vernon asked, what's FSRA? So maybe you can say it so then our team can actually make sure that they put that web link in for folks. Or what we'll do is if we will get it for folks in the post-event email so that you have that information. But Celine, can you say what FSRA stands for?
Sorry, it's the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, I believe.
Perfect. We will find that information and we'll either get it in the chat now, but we'll also get it in the post-event email. We're also told that the CRA also has a retirement calculator that can also be helpful as well. So we might actually find that. I'm going to ask the team so that we can put that in the post-event email as well. If that's, again, another helpful one. Maria was asking, where can I get information to buy a long-term care insurance? There certainly are some private providers out there who do provide that. I would investigate that. I know that often these private plans can be incredibly expensive and cost prohibitive, but take a look and see what's out there and if there's something right for you. And I want to finish with this last question. We've had so many that have just popped in all of a sudden. Celine, you're going to take this one. They said the statistic you quoted about 60% of Canadians not having a workplace plan, is that specifically no access to a DB plan or to any workplace plan, DB or DC? I know you know this answer.
It's any work plan, DB or DC.
Perfect. And
so
then go ahead.
Sorry, I would just say, I think that's the conversation. The conversation needs to be, how do we ensure that there are more and more registered pension plans available for Canadians?
Right. And then Serena asked, I think, a really important question. She said, in your policy recommendations, I wondered why there was no mention about equity for racialized immigrant older adults who are significantly more at risk of low income due to precarity and disadvantages of employment. Serena, I completely agree with you. And actually what we talk about, we talk about this at a high level in our recommendations, especially the 6th recommendation. When you get into that, you'll see where we talk about low income Canadians and specifically who ends up being a lower income Canadian. And in the body of the report too, we really focus on how there are more equity deserving populations who are more financially disadvantaged, and hence why we need to have better later life income systems for everybody, and recognizing that immigration status and so many other things can impact our ability to be financially secure later in life. So I just want to acknowledge that, but also note that we did actually do some work focusing on that in the report, and in that 6th recommendation in particular that we wanted to not leave out as well. I have to actually call it now, because my goodness, we've had so many good questions that have come in. We got through 2/3 of them, so that makes me feel good. But hopefully people feel that we've been able to get through as many of them as well. I'm going to say, first of all, thank you very much, Celine. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. We had a very active audience as usual, who are obviously really engaged in this issue, and I hope to continue working with you and your team at OMERS on really, kind of advocating for better financial security and supports for older Canadians. And I think we've enlightened some more people who are going to be part of our coalition of the willing. So I'm going to say thank you to you, Celine, and say goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha.
Thank you. And we'll just post our last slide here, which is really just a thank you slide, and just to let you know what next steps are. So I just want to thank you for attending today's session. What we are going to be doing, if you want to learn more about our work, you can please visit our website, NIA Aging or niaging.ca. On that, you can look at all of our reports, including a few more reports since this one that have been done, that look at long-term care insurance, that look at the future of long-term care in Canada, and really focus on a lot of the issues that we talked about today. At the end of this webinar, you're going to get a post-event questionnaire. We would really love your feedback, so please give us any feedback that you can, so we can improve the quality of our webinars and even learn about future topics you'd like to hear about. And then finally, you will get a post-event email. So everyone who registered for today's webinar will get a post-event email that'll have a copy of the report, a copy of today's recording, and also some links to some of the organizations and resources that we talked about today. So I want to say again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.